Welcome to this third lecture on determining orbits. Before starting the lecture, I will summarize what we did in our last class. So, in the last class, I talked about the equivalent description of the central force problem in terms of one dimensional problem, okay. And on the basis of that, we also discussed the kind of orbits that we are likely to get, okay. And that we did for few example cases, where we took inverse square law, inverse cube law and harmonic oscillator and so on, and we described the kind of orbits that you are likely to get. So, this is what we did in the last class. In today's class, what I am going to do is all those orbits that we talked about. Now, we want a mathematical description or mathematical method of determining these orbits, okay. And orbits, remember, are the important things. This is what we normally see whenever we look in this look up in the sky and look at the planetary motion. We see orbits. We think that electrons are in orbit around atomic nucleus and so on. So, we want to determine the orbits, and by orbit what I mean is the position or the distance of the particle from the origin in terms of theta, or in general a curve that a particle follows. Now, since we are using polar coordinates, it would come to distance as a function of theta, and then we will derive a differential equation which gives us the orbits directly. And also I will discuss another method by which you can directly get orbits. And finally, we will close this lecture by discussing when we are likely to get closed orbits. That question is also fascinating. I will discuss this when we come to that section. Okay. So, to derive the differential equation for orbits, I will begin with the equations of motion. Now, you remember the equations of motion we derived from the Lagrangian, and that is m r double dot minus L square by m r cube, and that is equal to the force there, okay. And f of r is the central force, it is the magnitude of the central force. And we remember we had recognized this term as a centrifugal term. So, if I take this term to the right hand side, then the equation looks like m r double dot is equal to the central force and plus a centrifugal term, and that is the equivalent one dimensional description or description of central force in with 1 degree of freedom. And then of course, there is a theta equation, but theta equation is obtained in terms of, because theta is a cyclic coordinate, we immediately have this theta is equal to L by m r square, where L is the angular momentum and this one L is the conserved quantity, okay. Fine. Now, when I try to solve these set of equations, I get what is called as a complete solution, and by complete solution what I mean is you obtain r and theta, both these coordinates, in terms of t. So, that is the complete description. Everything that you want to know about the system is included in r of t and theta of t. Of course, we will supply the initial conditions. Initial conditions will be supplied as the angular momentum, the total energy and the starting point, and you get this the complete solution. And once we know the complete solution, we also know the orbit, okay. What we do is we simply eliminate t from these two functions and get r directly in terms of theta, okay. It turns out that for central force problems, it is in fact lot easier to get the orbit equation directly rather than trying to find the complete solution. We probably many times may not be interested in the complete solution. The several orbit parameters, including the period of orbit, probably can be derived without actually getting these two functions there. So, the aim in this section in today's topic is to try and find this r of theta directly without having to solve the equations of motion. That is the idea. Okay. So, the first approach is to try and construct the differential equation for the function r in terms of dependent variable theta. Okay. Now, what we can do is this. I already have this part here, equation here, which says theta dot is L by mr square, and if I then want time derivative, basically I want to eliminate time from this equation. If I want to eliminate time from this equation, time also appears as a in the differentiation process there. So, a d by dt can be written as d theta by dt into d by d theta, and this is just theta dot, and we know theta dot is L by mr square. Okay, so, now I know how to eliminate t from that equation, because wherever there is a d by dt, I replace it by d by d theta. And of course, remember time t does not explicitly appear anywhere in this equation. Remember, in the central forces, this f is assumed to be independent of time t. Okay. And so there is no explicit time dependence there. Fine. So, you put this back in this first term there. I want to look at only the first term to begin with. So, that is the second derivative of r with respect to t, and for this one what I will do is write it as two separate derivatives, d by dt of d by dt of r. Okay. And the reason for writing it like this is I know how to write d by dt in terms of d by d theta. So, if I do that, I get, so for first d by dt I have L by mr square d by d theta, and for the second d by dt I have L by mr square dr by d theta. Okay. Fine. And it would of course be beneficial, and this we have seen earlier too, if I replace this variable r or the coordinate r by another coordinate u, which is given as 1 over r. So, I will make that substitution too to obtain the differential equation that we want. So, if I want to put r is equal to 1 over u in this one, then I will do something like this. I want dr by d theta, and I will write it as dr by du into du by d theta, because I want the differential equation in terms of u. And what is dr by du? Because r is 1 over u, dr by du is minus 1 over r square, minus 1 over u square. So, I will substitute that here. So, you get minus 1 over u square into du by d theta, and you put this back into this equation here. So, this one basically, if I take this u square to the other side, then this u square to the other side, it will go to the numerator, and then I will replace it by 1 over r again. So, 1 over r square dr by d theta, this is nothing but minus du by d theta. And now, you put this back here. Okay. If I put this back here, then I have 1 over r square dr by d theta, that will get replaced by du by d theta. Okay. And then I have 1 over r square d by d theta there. So, I want to put this result here back into the equation here. Now, first thing I will do is this L and m are constant. So, I will pull them out. So, that will become L square by m square, and then you have r square, which becomes u square in the numerator, and then you have d by d theta, and now you have 1 over r square dr by d theta. So, there is a 1 over r square dr by d theta, and this is exactly equal to minus du by d theta. So, that I will put it back here. So, that comes to the second derivative of u with respect to theta into all this factor there, and this is what I want to put back into this equation here. So, basically r double dot is equal to this much. So, I will wipe these two lines in between, okay, and let us put this back in this equation. So, that will become minus L square by m, one m got cancelled, into u square du by d theta, and now I have L square by m and there is 1 over r cube, which becomes u cube. On the right hand side I will write this as function of u instead of function of r, and you can finally write this by dividing by all the factors here. This would be equal to d second derivative of u with respect to theta plus u is equal to minus m by L square u square and into f, and this is our key equation there. So, this differential equation, if we solve, this is basically dependent variable is u, which is same as coordinate r, and independent variable is theta, and you solve this using the initial conditions, and that would give you u as a function of theta. Okay. So, this is one way of obtaining the orbit equation. Now, you can immediately look at this equation and try and draw few conclusions out of this one. The nice conclusion that one gets is the symmetry of the orbits. So, if you want to use potentials instead of the force, then of course, I will write F, which is minus dV by dr, and that is equal to minus du by dr and d by du of the potential itself, and du by dr we already know, that is equal to minus u square d by dr, and if I use this one, then I get the final equation in terms of the potential. So, it is a second derivative of u with respect to theta plus u is equal to minus m by L square and a derivative of potential with respect to u. So, you can use either this equation or this equation to find the equation of the orbit. Now, this of course, differential equation will be solved using initial condition. So, you have given u at theta naught, it is a second order differential equation. So, you will need two initial conditions. One would be u as a function of theta or u at a particular theta naught, and also the derivative of u with respect to theta at theta naught. But what you notice here is that this equation is invariant under the transformation theta going to minus theta. What does that mean? The solution that you obtain here will be invariant under such a transformation. But what will happen to the initial condition? Du by d theta, of course, at this one will not be invariant. So, if you are looking for invariance, I must look for the invariance of the differential equation, and I also must look for the invariance of the initial conditions. The u of course remains as it is, but du by d theta will change the sign, and if you want this initial condition, the first derivative, to remain invariant under this transformation theta to minus theta, what does that mean? Du by d theta must be equal to 0, and when do you have du by d theta is equal to 0? Du by d theta is equal to 0 also automatically means dr by d theta is equal to 0. That means this will happen at the turning point. At the turning point, your du by d theta is equal to 0. That means the value of r changes as theta changes, but it comes to a turning point, there the value of r does not change. In fact, it starts changing the direction. So, if r was increasing, at turning point r starts decreasing, at the lower turning point it will start increasing again. So, this happens at the turning point, and what it says is that if this condition is met, then the trajectories, whether you use theta or minus theta, the trajectories would be same. But what does that mean? If you look at geometrically, this is where our turning point is. So, I will take the first simple case of the elliptic orbit. This is where our turning point is there, and okay, these two are the turning points. And remember, as the particle travels, the angle theta is measured from positive x axis, okay, and this is where the turning point is. Okay. So, this is the angle theta. Now, what it says is that if you take this turning point and take this line, and about this line the trajectory can be reflected. Remember, when theta increases, it goes in the counterclockwise direction. So, basically the particle would be moving like this, the trajectory that you get is oriented in a counterclockwise direction. But when you substitute theta to minus theta, then the trajectory grows in the clockwise direction. And what it is saying is that whether you go in the clockwise direction or anti-clockwise direction, if you start at the turning point, in both cases you will get the same orbit, okay, and this is what it actually shows. And in fact, in this case the other turning point is exactly opposite of this. So, for both turning points the axis around which you look for symmetry is same. Here is one more example. This is the example again can be thought of as a hyperbolic orbit. This is what you would get in inverse square law. And where is the turning point? Here this is the origin, this one here is the turning point. Okay. Now, when the particle comes in, it comes to the closest distance and turns back and goes back to the infinity. This is basically typical what is called as a scattering or unbounded orbit. And if you take a line which joins the turning point with the origin, and you can see that the trajectory is symmetric. So, whether the particle travels this way, if you this way or that way, in either case you would get exactly the same orbit. Okay. One more example, a more complicated one. Here, as you see that this is a bounded orbit, but it is not closed, or at least from this diagram it does not seem closed. Okay. And look at the turning points. So, if I join the line of turning points, it will pass through like that. Okay. And in fact, for each turning point there you can draw a line like this. And if you look at the orbit about any of these lines, you will see the orbit is symmetric. So, if you start the motion at this point, whether you go this way or you go this way, in either case you will get exactly the same trajectory. And this is one delightful result that we can obtain from the orbit equation without doing any calculation. Okay. All right. Now, solving differential equations, of course, this gives you very elegant way of doing things, but probably this may not be necessary. Remember, we in central forces we already have two constants of motion, which means I can construct an integral form for the orbits. Here, if I look at the first integral, remember while deriving the equations of motion, or in the very first lecture we discussed this dr by dt. From the dr by dt, the energy equation, I can write down dt is equal to dr divided by square root of E minus V minus L square by 2 m r square, basically E minus V effective to the power half and into this factor of 2 by m. And also from d theta by dt, I have another equation, dt can be written in terms of theta, and this is how I can eliminate time t. Instead of eliminating t, you eliminate differential dt and you would get one single equation. So, here is another equation. So, now you have d theta, and I will take all this multiplying factor, take it to the other side of the equation, and it would be L over m r square dr divided by all this bracket there. integrate both sides. If I integrate both sides, this side the integration is simple, that would be theta minus some constant theta naught, which corresponds to the initial condition r naught theta naught, and then you have this integral here. And I have rewritten this integral in a slightly different form. This r square I have put it in the numerator. So, this will be dr by r square, and the remaining factors all have been taken inside the bracket. So, you have 2 m e by l square minus 2 m v by l square and minus 1 over r square. And you can immediately see the reason for doing this manipulation. Of course, I am going to write this in terms of the coordinate u instead of coordinate r. So, I get theta minus theta naught, and if I put u is equal to 1 over r, then du of course is dr by r square, but with a minus sign, and in the denominator of course everything here is constant. V of course we will write in terms of u, and there was 1 over r square which becomes u square, and this is the neat integral. Everything on the everything in the integrand is known. We in principle should be able to integrate this. Okay. So, this is the final form there. Now, if I look at a function which is of the form r to the power n, basically a power law. So, our inverse square law, harmonic oscillator, all these are included in this. If your force goes as r to the power n, then V will go as r to the power n plus 1 or u to the power minus n minus 1. And if I substitute that back into this, then of course, all that will happen is I have this is a constant factor, and this would be u to the power minus n minus 1, and there is a minus u square. And if you remember the standard table of integrals from your 12th standard, the square root of a quadratic expression has a very simple solution. Those are all circular or harmonic solutions, they are in terms of cos and sine. So, if this the quantity inside this bracket is quadratic, the answer is really simple, and that we can immediately write down. So, I will get circular functions. When will I get a quadratic equation inside this? If n is equal to minus 1, minus 2 or minus 3. Only in these three cases we will get quadratic inside, and then the solution will be simple. And if I have n is equal to minus 2, we immediately recognize this. This is nothing but inverse square law. If n is equal to minus 3, that is inverse cube law. N is equal to minus 1 is a difficult one. Okay, that when you have minus 1, potential actually is constant. I mean, this formula of course will not work. Then the potential become constant, and when the potential is constant, the force is 0. And that of course will not give you this force law there. Okay. There is one more possibility there. If I substitute u as square root x, make a simple substitution for the purpose of integrating the equation, and if you are doing that, then you get n is equal to 1 case. I will leave this one for you to solve and show that the harmonic oscillator here can be solved by using u is equal to square root x. Again the solution is circular. In fact, the answer here would be ellipse. Okay. It is not that these are the only possibilities for which this problem can be solved. These are the easiest solutions where you get circular functions as answers. But of course, there are many other techniques by which you can get the answer, some sort of a closed or analytic answer out of this. And even if analytic answer is not possible, it is always possible to use, this is the modern day modern age of computers, and you can do computations, solve do integrals like this very easily. And the determination of orbits just numerically to a desired accuracy is possible. So, that is why this one here in fact is a very suitable equation or suitable form for obtaining the orbits, because this is also amenable to numerical integrations there. Okay. Now, I will come to a more fascinating question. See, whenever we look at the planets and planetary motion, we see all these closed orbits, and then of all those orbits that we talked about in our second lecture or in our last lecture, the bounded orbits, they of course go around the center of the force. Question is, are those orbits closed or not? And to find that answer to that question, whether central force will always have the closed orbits or not, we will try and find here. Okay. Out of these circular orbits are the easiest ones. So, circular orbit means the distance from the origin is constant, say some r naught, and that distance is not changing because it is a circle. That means r dot must be equal to 0. If r dot is 0, when will that happen? That happens when the force, the central force, is actually balancing the centrifugal force. That is, F effective is 0, and F effective, remember, is nothing but a derivative of V effective. So, if F effective is 0, what does that mean? V effective must have either a minimum or a maximum. At the location of minimum, the derivative of V will be 0, and that means the force will be 0 or effective force will be 0. Here is one some examples there. This one was our 1 over x potential, and you can see that this is green line here is the centrifugal one, the orange line is minus 1 over r. So, this is the attractive inverse square force, and at r naught you have a minimum. And we also looked at attractive inverse cube law. For attractive inverse cube law, the centrifugal term is weaker compared to 1 over r cube term, and that is why the effective potential goes to minus infinity, and at r is equal to infinity it goes to 0. So, somewhere there is a maximum at some value of r naught, and this is the harmonic oscillator. In all these cases, there is a minimum or maximum. And what must be the energy of these circular orbits? That must be exactly equal to the value of the effective potential at the minimum. Remember, in the last class we had talked about, if I have energy which is like this, then I have two turning points. The orbit oscillates between r1 and r2. So, basically energy is smaller, the oscillations are smaller, and exactly at this point, when the energy is equal to the minimum value of the potential or the maximum value of the potential there, that is when you get circular orbit. That is when the two turning points r1 and r2 will merge into one single point. Okay. And that means it must be equal to V of r naught plus, and that of course is r naught again. One of the immediate conclusions is that if F effective is 0, that means the F of r naught must be equal to minus L square by m r naught cube. This is the centrifugal term, and this is the central force. And if you look at this, your L is constant, m is constant, L is squared, so it is positive, mass is always positive, r is always positive. So, your force must be attractive. If the force is not attractive, you cannot have a circular orbit. Okay? This is what the conclusion here is. At least in the immediate neighborhood of r naught, you must have So, at least there must be a local minimum. So, immediate neighborhood of r naught, the force must be attractive, and that is when you will get circular orbits. When can we, suppose my force is attractive, can I get a circular orbit at any distance, or is the distance fixed? In fact, turns out that for any distance from the origin, you can construct a circular orbit of any radius if force is attractive everywhere, and that you can do by something like this. If at t is equal to 0, I want to set this particle in motion in such a way that it follows a circular orbit. So, at t is equal to 0, suppose I am going to start that motion at r naught theta naught. So, now what else I need to choose? Remember, we have this 4 initial constants. One was r naught theta naught and the derivatives of r naught and theta naught, but that is equivalent to energy and angular momentum. So, I can actually choose energy and angular momentum too, but anyway, here what I will do is I need to choose the velocity, radial velocity, and I will choose the radial velocity to 0 and the tangential velocity or angular velocity to minus f r naught by m r naught. You can immediately see that if I do this, then quite clearly, because r dot is 0, E must be equal to V effective. Remember, half m r dot square is E minus V effective. So, if r dot is 0, E is equal to V effective. So, one condition is satisfied, and the second condition is because V r naught has a minimum, and how do we know that it has a minimum? That is because of this condition here, and that is when F effective is 0. Okay. So, if you simplify this, then you would get centrifugal part, centrifugal force term is equal to minus of F r naught, and that is when F effective is 0. So, if both these conditions are satisfied, then you have a, so it does not matter where you want to start the motion. I have given you prescription. If you are standing, this is useful in, for example, when we send satellites into orbits, you take them using rockets to a point on the orbit, and then you have to give some direction to it, okay, some projection to it, so that it continues to stay in the orbit after that. There is no driving there is no driving force once it is propelled into the orbit. It must go around under the influence of inverse square gravity, and the prescription would be something like this, okay, and that would be a circular orbit. Okay. Now, the circular orbit, we saw two cases there. One was with the inverse square law, you get a minimum in the potential, and you have inverse cube law in which you get a maximum, and which one of these two would be stable orbits? By stable, what we mean is when I disturb that particle a little bit from the circular orbit, suppose it is performing a circular orbit, and at some point you give slight amount of radial velocity. Okay. If you give slight amount of radial velocity, then it will be pulled back towards the orbit if V effective has a minimum. If V effective has a maximum at the circular orbit, of course, the particle will just fly away to the infinity. So, the orbits are stable if V effective has a minimum, and when we say V effective has minimum, what that means is that the second derivative must be greater than 0 there. Okay. Fine. Now, calculate this. We know that derivative of V effective with respect to r, the first derivative, is equal to minus f. So, this is V effective. So, what you would get here is minus f effective, and minus f effective is minus f minus this centrifugal term. Okay. Take one more derivative there, and that would give you minus f prime here, and then you would have 3 L square by m r naught to the power 4. Okay. This is also equal to, so this is minus f prime. What would this term can be rearranged like this. Remember, L square by m r cube, that is nothing but L square by m r cube is a centrifugal term, that must be equal to the force at r naught. So, I am going to write this as f prime minus 3 times f, and there is of course this is r naught to the power 4. So, there will be 1 r naught here, and remember both these f prime is calculated at r naught, f is calculated at r naught. So, this is the condition that we must have, and then you can rearrange this. So, f prime must be less than minus of 3 f by r naught, and then you take this f to the other side, giving you the final condition for a stable orbit. So, stable orbit would be obtained if r naught by f into this f prime is greater than minus 3. This inequality has changed because remember the force is attractive, that means this f is negative. So, when I take f from right hand side to the left hand side, there is of course change in the inequality. So, there is one possibility, and you can see that if I apply this to a power law, then for f is equal to some minus k times r to the power n, where k is some positive constant, say. Calculate this, the left hand side would be r naught divided by k r naught to the power n, and the derivative when you take this will be n times minus k r naught to the power n minus 1. This gives you condition n must be greater than minus 3. So, all those power laws for which n is greater than minus 3. So, here for all these power laws you will have stable orbits. N is equal to minus 3 is not included in this condition. Remember, this is a strict inequality, and what happens at n is equal to minus 3? When n was minus 3, what is this? This is inverse cube. Inverse cube, if I just quickly go back into the slides and remind you, there is a inverse cube, and you see for inverse cube what you get is a maximum, and you know that for this particular point I am not going to get the stable orbit. Okay. So, this is how you get stable circular orbits. Now, what will happen if I increase the energy a little? Now, what will happen if I increase? So, if I have energy equal to this point here, energy is equal to V effective at minimum, then of course, I have a stable circular orbit. Now, I am going to do is increase energy a little. What happens? Oh, now you have a circular orbit, and then the particle would be doing small amount of oscillations as theta is varying. R goes from R1, that is this turning point, to R2, which is the other turning point. So, the particle would of course be going away from the origin and then coming back towards the origin between the two circles of the radius R1 and R2. So, that is what we expect, and that orbit, would it be closed or not is the question, and we will derive a condition for the closed orbits there. So, if I write the same thing, remember V effective has a minimum in R, that is at R naught V effective is minimum. If I take U variable, U is 1 over R. How would this graph look like if I replace, or if I try to plot the potential as a function of U? So, remember u is 1 over r. So, at r is equal to 0, u is infinity, and at r is equal to infinity, u is 0. Okay. All that will happen is this graph would be turned around, and the point at infinity you have to bring it to 0, and the part of the graph here will go to infinity. So, when there is a minimum in R naught, minimum in V effective at R naught, correspondingly there will be a minimum at U naught, which is equal to 1 over R naught. Okay. And if there is a minimum in U, then I can do a Taylor expansion of this near U naught. So, V effective will be equal to the value of V effective at U naught, that is the minimum value there, and plus half k U minus U naught square. And what we are going to assume is that the perturbation is small. If the perturbation from the original orbit is small, then U minus U naught will remain small, and I am going to conveniently ignore all the other terms of the Taylor expansion. So, this is what I have. Now, you go back and look at the equation of motion. If I look at the equation of motion, when I was transforming, deriving the differential equation for the orbit, I had minus L square U square by m into second derivative of u with respect to theta, and that was equal to u square into V effective, derivative of V effective with respect to u. I will ask you people to cross check this. Okay. Remember, we have written the same equation in terms of. Now, what is the derivative of V effective with respect to u? I am going to substitute this form, which we already know is valid in the neighborhood of u naught. If I substitute that here, what I get is second derivative. So, that is u double prime is equal to some constant into u minus u naught, that is a deviation from u with a minus sign. Does this differential equation look familiar to you? Yes, this is the harmonic oscillations. So, basically not in R, but in u there will be a harmonic variation about the minimum, okay, about u naught, and the answer we should be able to write. But this constant k here, which comes from here from the Taylor expansion. So, k is nothing but second derivative of V effective with respect to u evaluated at u naught, and this factor here I am going to call it as beta square. What would that be? That is the angular frequency. Okay. So, beta square or frequency of oscillation, beta square is nothing but this constant here m k by L square, and that is when this looks like harmonic oscillator equation. And the solution we know, solution is u minus u naught is equal to some constant times cos of beta into theta minus some theta naught, but that we can always adjust. So, the solution here is immediately can be immediately obtained. Now, what would this beta be? We can actually calculate the value of this beta from the force law. So, I will do that here. Let us start by taking the second derivative of, and remember my d by du, u is 1 over r. So, d by du is 1 over r square times d by dr. So, you can write that as r square times d by dr with a minus sign here and there, and this of course should be evaluated at r naught. But what is this? That is nothing but the force, okay. And if I calculate all of this, so I would get r square times f, and then you take one more derivative. So, it would be r to the power 4 into f prime, and then would be r, so that would be r cube times f, and there is one more term, okay. I will ask you people to do this calculation from here to here, and then beta square was nothing but m k by L square. So, that would give me r naught by f into df by dr plus 3. Okay. Remember, I have made again the substitution that your force term f at r naught, that is this one, is equal to L square by m r cube, m r naught cube. So, if you make that substitution, you can simplify this factor here and it comes to this. So, a beta square can be written in terms of the force. Okay. Fine. Now, when will the orbit be closed? The orbit will be closed if this beta is a rational number. How so? I will give you a few examples here. So, if beta is rational number, then of course, the orbit will be closed. Look at one example. This is where beta is equal to 1. If beta is equal to 1, what does that mean? U minus u naught is simply cos theta. If it is cos theta, cos 0 is again exactly equal to cos of t 2 pi. Okay. That is when the value of u at 0 and value of u at 2 pi is exactly same. So, orbit actually goes to a maximum, that is r2, then comes back and has the same value when theta is equal to 2 pi. That is when you get the closed orbit. Okay. When theta goes through one cycle and if u comes back to the same value, that is your closed orbit. But those are not the only possibilities. How about this one? This is beta is equal to 5. So, what happens is that between theta is equal to 0 and theta is equal to 2 pi, there are 5 cycles of u. That is exactly what you see. This is minimum in R1, that is maximum in u, minimum in u, and so on. It will go back and forth 5 times. But when it comes back to 2 pi, okay, when it comes back to 2 pi, you again have the same value, okay, because it is now going to be u is equal to cos of beta theta. So, if theta is equal to 2 pi, then it is a cos of 10 theta, 10 pi, and cos of 10 pi is same as cos of 2 pi and is also same as cos of 0, and that is when you get the closed orbit. But there is something more that can happen. How about this one? This is where, so this is my circle showing R1, this is my circle showing R2, and the blue curve here is the trajectory. What is going to happen in this case? So, this is beta is equal to half. So, when it goes through, so it is basically cos of pi, cos of theta by 2. So, when theta becomes 2 pi, it is cos of pi, and that is when you get the minimum. So, you start at theta is equal to 0, by the time you go to theta is equal to 2 pi, the factor inside the cos has changed only by pi, and that is equal to minus 1. That is when you get minimum in r or maximum in u, and then it goes back to its original value by the time theta is equal to 2 pi. Okay. So, when theta is equal to 4 pi. So, basically the orbit does not close by the time you make one's revolution. It actually, you need 2 revolutions, and after 2 revolutions the orbit will close. Here is one more example. There, this is beta is equal to 2 by 3. What will happen? The orbit will close only after 3 revolutions, not after 2 revolutions. So, if you closely follow this orbit here, then if you start from this point here, you can see that it goes all the way up there, then it does this another one, and it is only after 2 pi that it after 6 pi that the orbit actually closes back here. Okay. So, these are the possibilities. You can get closed orbit if beta is any rational number. Okay. And the story does not end here, because remember, while calculating these closed orbits, we of course made an approximation. The approximation was that we kept only the second order term in the Taylor expansion. The orbit may not actually be closed if the gap between R1 and R2, or the minimum and maximum in R is larger. Okay. And when that happens, some of these orbits which are already looking like closed orbits, they may not be closed orbits. The calculation is tedious, but it does give the result. So, if you include, for example, third order term, then you get a result, and that result says that you can get closed orbits only if you have inverse square law, or the potential goes as x square, potential goes as r square. That is your harmonic oscillator, that is like your Hooke's law. That theorem is called as a Bertrand's theorem, and all these orbits which are closed orbits, they would be valid only if the difference between, or the energy is very close to V effective minimum. So, finally, the conclusion of Bertrand's theorem, which we have not proven here, but is that only for inverse square law and only for Hooke's law that you can have closed orbits. And then the Goldstein in his book argues that you look at the planetary motion. If you look at the planetary motion, all those orbits look closed. In fact, they are not closed, but there is a very tiny amount of anomaly there in the closing of the orbit. So, the orbit which looks like this would not exactly be closed here, but would probably close slightly away from it, away from the original point. But all those cases, they can be traced back, because you see the planetary system is not just two body system, there are many bodies there, and the other bodies actually cause perturbations, and the orbit remains orbit is not closed. But in the first approximation, all the planetary orbits are closed orbits. So, which one of these two laws can it be, Hooke's law or inverse square law? It is very unnatural to think that the Hooke's law will extend all the way to the infinity. The potential grows as. So, the only other possibility is the inverse square law, and that is another way of justifying the inverse square law for gravitation, or Newton's law of gravitation. Okay. So, with this I will close today's topic. In the next topic, we will go to the actual examples, apply all this theoretical framework that we have derived in in these 3 lectures, and apply it to the Keplerian problem.